Professor Teter is Professor of History at the Spidler Chair of Judaic Studies at Fordham University and serves currently as the Vice President for Publications of the Association for Jewish Studies. Professor Teter is the author of Jews and Heretics in Catholic Poland, 2005, Sinners on the Trail, 2011, and 2 edited volumes as well as numerous articles in English, Italian, Polish, and Hebrew. Professor Teter is currently a fellow at the Coleman Center for Scholars and writer at the New York Public Library, completing her book on blood libels in Premodern Europe, which we are awaiting. Yes. Professor Teter will speak about analysis of rethinking modernity with pre-modern Jewish history. Please.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be part of this conference, and I have such deep feelings about Moshe and his role, as Kimi said yesterday, in nurturing young scholars. And he's always been an inspiration to me as a scholar and also as for his Menschlichkeit. So thank you for having me here. Yesterday, Kimi mentioned twins. For those of us who work on pre-modern Polish history, the twins are Moshe Rossman and the other Gershon Hundert. And when I had the opportunity for this conference to review Moshe's work, to revisit, I should use the word, revisit Moshe's work, I realized, sort of felt like in the 90s when Fukuyama issued his book, End of History. I said, what's news to say after all the work that Moshe has done? So, but let me try. In his book, How Jewish is Jewish History, Moshe Rossman responded from the perspective of Jewish history to what some scholars called epistemological crisis among historians in light of the linguistic turn and postmodernism that followed. Postmodernism not only challenged historians' work by casting doubt about sources and our conclusions about the past, through, to quote Moshe Rossman, cognitive relativism, indeterminacy of subject and object, power assertions, and the literary nature of historical narrative. But in case of Jews specifically, it began to use Jews as metonyms in discourse rather than Jews as historical actors. The debate over how Jewish history should be studied and understood had of course been ranging since the scholars of Wissenschaft des Judentums began to write about it, if not even earlier, with David Gans or Azaria de Rossi and others. And it certainly was a big issue when history began to serve the national stories in the modern era. The modern tellings of Jewish history have been burdened by the conceptual framework created by German Jewish historiography that, by emphasizing Jewish integration and acculturation or assimilation as hallmarks of the modern, contributed to the profound and long-lasting perception that in pre-modern Europe, Jews were separate, even alien, an alien minority. Marginal enough not to be included in the general histories. The blinding nature of modernity has made it nearly impossible to see the past clearly. While the social and legal position of the Jews in Germany had to some extent helped color these very problematic readings of the broader Jewish past, such legal and social position was not shared by all Jews in early modern Christian Europe. It is perhaps not surprising that scholars of pre-modern East European Jewish history began to shatter this problematic historiographic legacy. In terms of modernity, Gershon Hundert's book on 18th century Poland certainly speaks to it. As Moshe Rossman argues, commenting on Shmuel Ettinger's assertion that, and this is Ettinger, at no period in their history have Jews barricaded themselves against social and cultural developments of other nation, and here's Moshe, Jews were always part of the social, cultural, and political context in which they lived. But as in the last decade, scholars have been re-examining or perhaps revisiting those assumptions, Simultaneously, a new wrench was thrown into their efforts: the well-meaning diaspora studies. For diaspora studies scholars, the Jewish experience has been considered paradigmatic, a scattered group that continued to long for its homeland while still living elsewhere. Yet the term diaspora is not unproblematic when it applied to Jews. For once, it is tightly connected with exile, a theologically loaded term on both Jewish and Christian side. And also, for the fact that it raises fraught questions about the meaning of homeland. In recent decades, scholars have debated the meaning of diaspora in comparison with other kinds of migration and immigrant communities, and among Jewish studies scholars about the distinction between the diaspora and galut. Diasporas, and especially the Jewish diaspora, have often been associated with the loss of homeland, dispersion, powerlessness, longing, exile, displacement, as well as alienation from a host land, and the formation of links between the various populations of the diaspora. As Barbara Kinschenberg-Gimlet pointed out, the diasporic discourse is strong on displacement, detachment, uprooting, and dispersion. All these categories imply that places where diaspora people, including Jews, made their homes were ultimately not their homelands, but merely hostlands. But that was not necessarily how Jews, including Polish Jews, perceived the places where they lived for many centuries. Diasporic discourse undermines their sense of belonging. For Jews in early modern Poland, Lithuania, for Jews in early modern Poland, Lithuania, only some of the characteristics of diasporas listed above would have rung true, while others now appear hollow in light of historical research. Although Polish Jews had indeed a real or ceremonial relationship with Eretz Israel, the historic Jewish homeland, praying each Passover, L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim, or contributing alms to Jews in the region, Poland was nonetheless their homeland. And in Poland, Jews were intrinsic to and inseparable from the country's social, political, and economic landscape, and we've heard some of that in the earlier papers. They perceived themselves as such, and they were so perceived by their non-Jewish neighbors. They were Jews, but they were Polish Jews, and Poland was their homeland. Their distinct identity as Jews did not necessarily imply alienation, even as they still connected to Jews and Jewish communities beyond the Lithuanian Commonwealth, and even if some Christian writers produced vitriolic anti-Jewish works. Let me give you an example. Writing in 1667 to a wealthy Sephardic financier, Abraham de Pinto of Amsterdam, the Polish rabbi Moses Rivkes, a war refugee in Amsterdam, expressed his longing for his home in Vilna and his desire to return there. As the news of peace in the Commonwealth reached the Dutch shores, he wrote, "Letters have come to me from the holy community of Vilna saying that peace has been declared between the King of Poland and the Muscovite, before whose sharp sword and the weight of war I was exiled from my home. Galiti me makomi," he wrote. And now, since the time of peace from those wars has come, and I have grown old, my soul longs, heshka nefshi, to go to my home, Lemakomi, in the holy community of Vilna. Rivkes was asking for financial help to get back home. Though some of the words seem formulaic, together the Hebrew expressions Rivkes chose to discuss his displacement in Amsterdam evoked the exile, the galut. It does not seem accidental that Rivkes chose the words of such weight to refer to his displacement from Vilna. For him, being in Amsterdam, where he published his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, was was exiled from the holy community of Vilna. Even as he longed for his home in Vilna, Rivka's stay in Amsterdam, together with fellow refugees, supported by Sephardic community, also illustrates the diasporic connections that Polish Jews developed not only with Ashkenazi Jews outside Poland, but also Sephardic Jews who famously kept themselves at far distance from Ashkenazim. Jews in Poland began to identify as distinctly Polish already mid-16th century. In 1568, the 1568 edition of Machzor, published in Venice, contains one of the first examples of an explicit reference to Polish minhag. Subsequently, printers would specify on the title pages places where the right of their books applied, like German lands, Ruthenia, Lithuania, Habsburg lands, and so on and so forth. Jews in Poland were Jews, thanks to both their Jewish identities and the legal status accorded to them by Christian authorities. And my argument about their integration should not be mistaken for assimilation. Because of that combined identity, as both Jews connected to other communities and inhabitants embedded in the land where they lived, studying Jews qua Jews and the fullness of their historical experience allows for a broader investigation of the past, both Jewish and non-Jewish. And each of Moshe Rosman's work has done directly that. Each book was seminal and pushed historians to think differently about their work and pushed the field in new directions. By focusing on the role of Jews in the Polish magnates' estates, the Lord's Jews revealed aspects of Polish history that challenged the negative preconceptions about the Polish magnates popularized by, on the one hand, Polish historiography that often had sought to lay blame for the partitions on the excesses of the magnates, and Jewish historiography and literature which popularized the negative image of the Porets, the exploitative, cruel Polish landlord. It showed how deeply involved the magnates were in the running of their estates and the crucial role Jews played there. Jews were an integral part of the estate and its business. I would even be more perhaps explicit that the book shows how Jews were integrated into the economy and society. The book challenged the notion of Jews as a marginalized, alienated group. It showed the confidence and security of Jews, and this is Moshe's words, the confidence and security of Jewish communities in the latifunian towns. Jewish homes were centrally located. And as the work of also of others now has shown as well, Jews were often referred to in various documents as mieszczanin or talisman or obywatel, citizen. The Jews' integration can also be seen in the subject of Jewish autonomy, and we've seen it in the previous paper very nicely. Traditionally used to show the Jews' distinctiveness and separateness. But scholars of early modern Polish Jewish history, including Moshe Rosman, have shown something, and Adam here again in his work and the published documents that have shown something else, exploding the notion of Jewish insularity and the notion that modernity has undermined Jewish autonomy. As Moshe wrote in The Lord's Jews, quote, the Kahal authority in Poland rested on both Jewish tradition and Polish sponsorship. Jews were part of a complex legal and political structure of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And as Moshe has argued, for the Polish authorities, the Kahal was an extension of their administration. This integration of Jews into Polish political structures of the Commonwealth and the complexities of the relations between between them and the Polish authorities are not just visible in the study of Jews in private domains. It is particularly striking in the surviving documents related to the activities of the Bar-Ilan. And again, Adam's work is incredibly important here. These documents illustrate the complex fiscal issues related to the position of Jews in Poland and the level of involvement in non-Jewish authorities in Jewish communal affairs, sometimes at the behest of Jews themselves. The sources, similar to those found by Moshe Rosman and other scholars working on Jews in private towns, undermine the idealized vision of Jewish autonomy in pre-modern Poland advanced by the earlier historians, who sought to contrast the pre-modern autonomy, which was said to have kept Jews insulated from external influences, to the supposed breakup of the Jewish community in the modern era. Indeed, the documents show the Polish authorities affirming or revoking the authority of rabbis, urging Jews to respect existing communal structures and administrative divisions, to obey the decisions of Jewish community leaders, or intervening at the behest of Jews. Some documents illustrate the presence of the representatives of Polish authorities at the meetings of the council. If these documents undermine the long since challenged idealized notion of Jewish autonomy, then they underscore integration of Jews into the political structures of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The fact that Christian officials intervened in the appointment of community rabbis and participated in the council should not be seen necessarily as an infringement on Jewish autonomy, but rather as an indication that the council and rabbis were seen as performing roles important to the proper functioning of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. How much the council was part of the state structures can be evidenced not only by the names of its officials, but also by the composition of the Waad, which resembled the composition and order of senators at the noble Sejm, with the community of Krakow at the head, followed by Poznan and then other communities. That the Council of Four Lands was intrinsically Polish is of course not a new claim. And the idealized and glorified, the Council, along with its Lithuanian counterpart, was embraced by earlier by both Zionist and diaspora-centered historians, especially in the early 20th century, as evidence of Jewish political autonomy and the quintessential body of Jewish self-government. This idealized image fit into then dominant notion of Jews in pre-modern times, that Jews in pre-modern times were isolated, struggling, or refusing to integrate into a broader society that had rejected them. Modern historians claim that all that ended up with the breakup of Jewish communal structures and the breakdown of barriers between Jews and Christians during modernity. Yet, as the scholarship of recent decades, the traditional narrative of Jewish insularity, victimhood, idealized piety that was only to be shattered by modernity no longer holds. Indeed, Moshe Rosman's own work has done much to destroy this notion. His second book, The Founder of Hasidism, A Quest for the Baal Shem Tov, has revolutionized the study of Hasidism by finding a historical Baal Shem Tov, and we'll hear more about it later on today. Like Jesus, the Besht was an elusive figure, known more from later generations, what later generations said about him than from his own towns. Moshe Rosman's book, based on new sources, or all sources found by him, offered the Baal Shem Tov not as a legend, not even as a historical figure reconstructed from legendary sources, as some earlier historians have tried to do by reading legends through a historical lens, but as a man who lived and worked in a specific time and place. Our modern assumptions about Hasidism turned out to be incorrect, but much more than incorrect understanding of Hasidism, but much of that incorrect understanding of Hasidism had shaped the popular understanding of Polish Jewish society as pious and insular. Examining Jewish experience in the pre-modern period on its own terms, without projecting modern ideas onto pre-modern period, or in words of Carol Symes, without subordinating the pre-modern period to modernity and doing epistemic violence to the period, may thus not only help us refine the understanding of pre-modern European history in general, and Jewish history in particular, but also our understanding of the modern era or modernity itself. The real historical Jews, not Jews as metonyms or tropes, may be in fact, to use Moshe's words, a test case, or perhaps even a useful category of an analysis for European history. Dispersed across many regions, Jews allow for a trans-regional or at least comparative approach. As part of the social, cultural, and political context in which they lived, Jews, along with their culture, their community, illuminate aspects of social, political, and cultural European history that may not be otherwise visible. Like gender and race, and subaltern studies have helped see new aspects of history and culture, Jews, understood through their full historical experience, shed light not just on their own past, or the Jewish part of Jewish history, but also on that of their surroundings. Indeed, Moshe Rossman's work prompts us to ask, for example, how Jewish was Polish history? Thank you.